Yo, what's up Serpa Squad? Tanner here, and I'm back with another terrarium build. I came up with the idea you're about to see after trimming down some spiderwood in last week's video. All of the little branches looked like they could be utilized to make miniature trees, and that's exactly what I did. In this one, I'll show you how I made a tiny tree landscape themed terrarium. To start, we'll go over all of the materials I'm using for this project. First is this nice glass container. I chose this one primarily for the shape. The gradual slope of the sides will work really well for the design I want to create. For my main hardscape elements, I've selected sandstone and spiderwood. As I said previously, the spiderwood branches will be perfect for making some tiny trees. I also have some fine gravel, quartz sand, activated carbon, and my custom substrate mix. It's composed of cocoa fiber, orchid bark, sphagnum moss, charcoal, and sand. I began by adding a layer of sand to create my false bottom. As I've explained before, there are plenty of ways to make these. I chose sand for this one because the design doesn't call for a very deep false bottom. After adding the sand and evening it out with a brush, I deposited a thin layer of activated carbon. This layer works with the false bottom to help keep the terrarium healthy. If you want to learn more about these layers and the functions they serve, I highly recommend following the video I've linked up in the card. With our base layers addressed, a thin layer of substrate mix was added. Having just a shallow layer to start will help me more effectively place the hardscape elements. In placing said elements, I started with a few large sandstones that will define the overall layout. I did so on the left and right sides of the container until I created something that resembled a small canyon. My vision with this is to have an area of trees perched atop a rocky landscape. To play along with this aesthetic, I added spoonfuls of substrate behind the stones. The substrate was really packed down with the spoon. This will make a better foundation to hold the branches in an upright position. To plant this one, I kept it simple with some thread moss. I chose this moss because it's very fine and will help retain the sense of scale I'm trying to achieve. I planted patches all over the raised area of land and between the stones. Here's what I ended up with after adding the moss. I think it really resembles a rocky hillside covered in grass. The composition of the stones and the fine look of the moss creates contrast and a nice sense of scale. I think it's time to mock up the layout with some of the spiderwood. Due to the compact nature of the moss and the substrate, I was able to easily secure all of the branches. What I did was situate the branches in a way that they arched over the rock formation and toward the front of the scape. I really like the look that was achieved, but it needs some foliage. To do the job, I utilized some fern moss. I think this was a great choice because it gives off the illusion of leaves when combined with the wood. To attach it to the wood, I used some brown sewing thread. All I did was get a manageable patch of moss and lightly wrap the thread around the outside of the moss to secure it in place. The end result is something that really resembles a small tree. It's probably also worth mentioning that I originally tried to do this by attaching a ball of sphagnum moss to the branches and then covering those with flame moss. It created a similar look, but in my opinion it appeared too man-made and was much more time consuming to pull off. Anyway, as I created the trees, I planted them atop the land formation. Joined together, they make an awesome canopy effect that I really think complements the rest of the scape. That said, the canopy needed a tad more foliage, so I added a few additional patches of moss. I also placed a twig in the open part to make it look like a defoliated branch. To complete the design, I poured sand into the front of the scape and evenly dispersed it with a brush. After that, I added some of the fine gravel for more texture and to make the transition to the background look more believable. Lastly, I gave the terrarium a good spray down with my pressurized mister. Usually I would cap this off with a cork. However, given the size, I think it took away from a lot of the work I put into this. Instead of that, I used the cork as a base for the container and a thin piece of plastic for the lid. Wait, I almost forgot. We've got to add some springtails as well. And there you have it, a tiny tree-themed terrarium. Overall, I really like how it turned out. I think the final product looks just like a rocky hillside covered in grass and trees. It's just shrunk down and put into a glass container. I also like how the canopy makes a shaded area over the rocks. I think it adds an element of mystery and interest that otherwise wouldn't be present. In my mind, I could totally see something like this out in the wilderness. What do you think? Could you imagine seeing something like this outside on a larger scale? It's funny, this whole build came about because of the spiderwood trimmings from a previous project. More often than not, a single element sparks the idea behind a build. I love it. There's so much to enjoy about these hobbies, and this is certainly an aspect to them that I truly appreciate. It only takes a small idea to create a beautiful, living piece of art. If you haven't made a terrarium yet, then what are you waiting for? You can make something simple or something advanced, something cheap or something expensive. The only real limitation is your own imagination. If you're looking for some inspiration, I'll link up my terrarium build playlist in the video description. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this project as much as I did. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one, Serpa Squad. Take care and peace.